The night was silent, too silent. A few miles from the front, under a cold French moon, hundreds of soldiers waited for the sound of engines that didn't exist. Rows of Sherman tanks stood in a muddy field, hulking silhouettes ready for war. But if you touched them, your hand would sink into rubber. In a few hours, German scouts would fly overhead. They'd see an entire American division, armored, armed, and advancing. They'd report it up the chain. And Hitler's generals would move their troops to counter a threat that wasn't real. That's how an army of artists, actors, sound engineers, and set designers fought one of the strangest wars in history. This is the story of the Ghost Army, the illusionists who fooled the Nazis, saved thousands of lives, and then disappeared into silence for half a century. A world at war. By 1944, the world had been burning for 5 long years. Hitler's empire stretched from the beaches of France to the gates of Moscow. The Allies had landed in Normandy that June, but every mile toward Germany came at a terrible cost. General Eisenhower knew something had to change. The Germans were master tacticians, disciplined, deadly, and constantly shifting forces in response to Allied movements. To win, the Allies needed more than muscle. They needed misdirection. War wasn't just about bullets anymore. It was about what the enemy believed. An idea is born. Inside a cramped office in London, a handful of strategists studied maps and photographs. They'd seen how the British had fooled Hitler before D-Day, fake tanks, fake radio traffic, even fake generals. Could America do the same, but on a much larger scale? The U.S. Army agreed to try. Their plan: create an entire fake army division, one that could move, fight, and deceive across Europe. But instead of frontline soldiers, they'd recruit people who knew how to trick the eye and the ear. Painters. Sound engineers. Set designers. Stage magicians. Many came from art schools, ad agencies, and Hollywood studios. Their mission wasn't to kill, it was to create the illusion of killing. They would build the greatest performance the world had ever seen. And they'd perform it in the middle of a war zone. They called themselves the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Unofficially, the soldiers nicknamed it, the Ghost Army. Meet the illusionists. In the summer of 1944, the 23rd arrived in France. There were about 1,100 of them, tiny compared to the real divisions they were supposed to mimic. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in creativity. Bill Blass, a young fashion designer from Indiana, sketched camouflage patterns by day and dreamt of couture at night. Art Kane, who would later photograph rock legends, carried a paintbrush instead of a rifle. And sound engineer Harold Dahl lugged around recording machines heavier than a tank's shell, filled with the roars and rumbles of battle. They weren't hardened warriors. But they were about to become some of the most important soldiers of the war. The art of warfare. Their weapons were bizarre. Giant inflatable tanks, life-size replicas of Sherman and Panther tanks made of rubberized canvas. You could inflate one with an air pump in under half an hour. From the air, they looked completely real. From the ground, they cast perfect shadows under the sun. Then there were the sound trucks. Modified half-tracks packed with enormous loudspeakers, each one capable of blasting battle noises up to 15 miles away. They played recordings of tanks clanking, soldiers shouting, trucks grinding through mud, all mixed like a movie soundtrack. They even faked radio chatter. Trained signalmen mimicked the patterns and personalities of real divisions, creating a convincing wall of electronic noise for German intelligence to intercept. And finally, one of their most dangerous tasks was impersonation. Men from the 23rd dressed in the insignia of real units and strolled through nearby towns, chatting loudly in bars and cafes about where their divisions were moving next. If a spy was listening, the lie would spread quickly. Every illusion was layered, sight, sound, and story, all reinforcing one another. By dawn, the enemy's picture of the battlefield was completely wrong. The first trial by fire. Their first test came near the Normandy front. The Germans had fallen back, but they weren't finished. Allied supply lines were thin, and a counterattack could have been devastating. The Ghost Army's job, convinced the Germans that a huge armored division was preparing to strike in a completely different location. They rolled out their rubber tanks under the cover of darkness. Generators hummed, fans inflated steel-gray giants one by one. Painters covered them with dust, mud, and even fake bullet marks to look battle-worn. By morning, reconnaissance planes photographed exactly what the Allies wanted them to see: rows of tanks, artillery pieces, supply trucks. The Germans redirected part of their defense, moving away from the real target area. For the first time, art had beaten strategy. The mission was a success. But it wouldn't be their last. The dangerous game. Every operation carried the same risk: discovery. If the Germans realized the deception, these men would have no real weapons, no real armor, no chance to defend themselves. During one mission in Luxembourg, a group of soldiers set up their decoys so close to enemy lines that they could hear German artillery in the distance. They inflated tanks while shells whistled overhead. At night, one private whispered to another, "If they find out we're fake, we're dead before morning." But they couldn't stop. Every hour, the Real divisions relied on their illusion to stay hidden. When day broke, German scouts flew overhead again, and the Ghost Army's fake armor fooled them completely. The deception held. The real troops slipped by unnoticed. Operation Viersen, the greatest trick. March, 1945. Germany was collapsing, but the Rhine River remained the last great obstacle. Hitler ordered his commanders to defend it at all costs. If the Allies could cross, the war in Europe would be over. To prepare the real crossing, the U.S. Ninth Army needed a distraction, a fake attack to pull German eyes away from where the true assault would happen. That job went to the Ghost Army. For 3 days, they transformed empty fields near the town of Viersen into a grand illusion. Hundreds of rubber tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were inflated and positioned along the roads. Sound engineers blasted recordings of tanks revving, pontoon bridges being built, and soldiers marching. Radio operators filled the air with frantic transmissions. To German intelligence, it looked like a massive armored force assembling to cross the Rhine. The deception worked perfectly. German units reinforced the wrong sector. When the real Allied divisions struck miles away, they met almost no resistance. Within days, the Rhine was crossed. Some historians believe that single act of illusion shortened the war, and saved tens of thousands of lives. The price of secrecy. The Ghost Army never marched in victory parades. Their missions were top secret. They couldn't tell their families what they had done, not for a year, not for 10 years, not for 50. After the war, most went back to quiet lives. Bill Blass became a world-famous fashion designer. Art Kane redefined photography. Others became teachers, architects, or anonymous veterans in small American towns. But inside each of them was the same memory, the night when their art became a weapon. They remembered the fear, setting up fake tanks under gunfire. They remembered the thrill, hearing that a German division had retreated because of their lies. And they remembered the silence, when no one believed their story. For decades, their missions were buried in classified archives, their heroism hidden in shadows. The truth revealed. It wasn't until the 1990s that their records were finally declassified. When the files were opened, historians could hardly believe what they read. Operation after operation, deception after deception, an entire war fought through imagination. Documentaries followed. Surviving veterans were interviewed. Men in their 70s and 80s finally told their stories to the world. One of them said quietly, "We were artists, not killers. But we fought a war just the same." Another added, "Every fake tank we set up, every sound we played, it meant real soldiers could live to see another day." Their medals were small, but their impact enormous. They proved that courage doesn't always roar, it can whisper through canvas and paint. The legacy. Today, replicas of their inflatable tanks stand in museums. At first glance, they look almost laughable, bright rubber relics of a bygone era. But behind each one lies a story of innovation, courage, and human creativity at its purest form. The Ghost Army didn't just trick the enemy. They redefined what it meant to fight. They showed that intelligence, artistry, and imagination could be as powerful as steel and gunpowder. And in a world that often celebrates destruction, they built victory from illusion. Reflection. Imagine this. A soldier crouches in the dark, painting shadows on an inflatable tank while artillery flashes in the distance. He's terrified, but he keeps working. He knows the louder his lies sound, the fewer real soldiers will die. That's heroism, in its most unexpected form. The Ghost Army didn't win medals for bravery, though they deserved them. They didn't seek fame or glory. They just wanted the war to end, and they used art to make it happen. When we talk about World War II, we remember the battles, the blood, the tanks, the explosions. But sometimes, victory came not from destruction, but from deception. And in that delicate balance between truth and illusion, a handful of artists helped save the world. This was their masterpiece.